Boo! So, Bram Stoker's Dracula has always had a special place in my heart. It is a dark, spooky story, the apotheosis of slow burn horror. Although I think Stoker is always interested in making things interesting, right? He has this tremendous narrative voice. He's able to counteract some of the issues you get with a story so old by using very creative language and the absurd and the to a certain extent even the perverse to grab your attention, to draw you in and keep you going. Even when I found some of like the exposition, which is such a fixture of the times, really, to be somewhat long-winded. Um, some things to clarify before I really dive into it. Bram Stoker was sort of set out to write this comprehensive vampire story based on a great deal of literary accounts, with his core influences being things like Carmilla and the Vampire and the Irish myth of Avartok. Um, and probably Elizabeth Bathory and Vlad the Impaler, although apparently neither are mentioned in Stoker's actual notes, which is interesting. Right away, we see Dracula as this monster, this evil, inhuman creature. He is not a misunderstood character. Unless by misunderstood you mean that he is an evil monster that you originally believed to be a normal human. He is evil, and he is the embodiment of evil. He is this cursed, self centered, undead demon of sorts, wreaking havoc on the world and slating his thirst for blood. He begins by tormenting John Harker, a lawyer who's helping him buy a house in London and move some of his things there. And this is by far the slowest part of the book, is the beginning, right? With Harker taking his sweet time finding out that this guy he's working for is not all he appears to be. He does pick up on some of the vampire traits, right? He sees that Dracula does not have a reflection. He's recognizes that he's afraid of crucifixes and only really operates at night. All these weird things that are red flags, right? Um, Although we do learn later in the book that Dracula is not destroyed by sunlight. He's not even really bothered by it at all. He only loses some of his powers when in sunlight, which is interesting. Um, but Harker eventually runs into the three sexy vampire ladies living in the castle, right? Who've come to be referred to as the brides of Dracula. They're going to eat him, but Dracula runs in and says some oddly suggestive things about Harker, and then offers the ladies a child in a sack instead of the poor Englishman. Um, but that's about the point when Harker decides to try and hightail it. Only the Count isn't having any of that. My guess is soon after he just realizes that Harker is too much of a threat and can't be allowed to persist. So he leaves Harker in the castle with the vampire ladies and is just going to let things play out. Harker, the brave, brave fool that he is, launches a full scale escape from the castle. He like climbs the walls and I think he jumps in a river at one point. His like hair turns white from the shock of it all. It's crazy. And that this is about the exact point when the story picks up big time. We're introduced back home to Dr. Seward, the administrator of the asylum, who is sort of being warned about the coming of Dracula by this guy Renfield, who's a thrall who doesn't really do much in the story. He just sort of he does some vaguely mysterious things and then kind of vanishes really, or kind of deflates, I guess you would say. Uh, he doesn't achieve much in the narrative, but there's so many cool characters in this. It's obviously going to be hard do to to do much with all of them, right? Even I don't know where to begin, and I didn't even write it. I just okay. Admittedly, Harker and like Seward are somewhat just kind of typical protagonists, I guess. Though they do become more interesting as the story goes on, and we get Mina Murray, who eventually becomes Mina Harker. She is awesome. She's like canonically the smartest person in the room at any given time. She's like a super genius who figures out most of what's going on really quickly and is very, very empathetic. She's in tune with people. Um, and she's only ever disadvantaged, really, by the idiots around her, such as Quincy Morris, who's a man so startlingly cowboy that um, my hunch is that Stoker uh, either didn't have a high opinion of Americans or didn't know any Americans because he is a lot. And you get Arthur Holmwood, right, who's a guy with a good heart. Um, and then there's Mina's best friend Lucy, who is unfortunately slain by Dracula and turned into a vampire. Um, yeah, about midway through Lucy's sickness, right? It's a long affair, Dracula turning her. Um, about halfway through the obvious sickness that is afflicting her, they call in Dr. Abraham freaking Van Helsing, who is just like my favorite character in the story by far. I actually like Quincy Morris, by the way. The tough talking cowboy, right? I actually like him, despite the possible stereotype involved. But I freaking love Van Helsing, who is this quirky Dutch like savant polymath freaking uber genius who, when the chips are down, turns into like super serious, thoughtful vampire hunter guy. He's crazy and awesome, and between him and Mina, they could have the story wrapped up lickety split. But Mina suffers from a lack of information, right? The guys just don't tell her important information, while Van Helsing suffers from people not really believing him when he says things like, that cute girl who died is now attacking and drinking the blood of children. Um, there's a hilarious scene, though, when Van Helsing just explodes at Seward. He really just like lets him have it, talking about the arrogance of assuming you know everything and how there are like turtles who live for a million years or whatever, and you wouldn't even know they exist if you didn't like study them meticulously. And that's his argument for vampires, and it sort of lands, right? But everyone has such a hard time doing what Van Helsing tells them to do, and like even when they get like Jonathan Harker returning, and telling them, warning them about Dracula, they still suffer from like this wariness to listen. Right? I mean, it's obviously a hard thing to stomach, but still, so, people you love are in danger. Yeah, I would like just listen to the weird Dutch man, I guess is what I'm saying. Uh, there's a lot of talk, I know, about the themes of the novel, and one of the very crucial ones is this idea of the foreigner, right? How Dracula is meant to be this evil foreigner who invades, and that's kind of offensive, I guess. But I'd argue that if that were the case, then I would argue that Van Helsing embodies the morally good and the healthy foreigner, right? That Dracula is more like a colonist or an imperialist even, that he is seeking to claim England for his own. It might be a bit of irony there too, of course, but because he's trying to take over England to claim the lives of those living in it, while Van Helsing is this positive, kind-hearted, good-natured foreigner who comes to stop the evildoer, right? And Van Helsing hates Dracula, by the way. I'm just going to bring up that he goes off on a rant at some point about how much of an idiot Dracula is, how he's like got this child brain in an ancient body, and it's freaking hilarious. Um, and it's just a great little chess game that they all wind up playing against this undead devil, right? He winds up half turning Mina, right? He attacks Mina and sort of almost turns her, but not quite, and they're forced to try and kill him quickly, lest she turn into a vampire upon her death. And like guys like Seward and Arthur and Quincy, they're like scrambling to avenge Lucy and do the right thing and all that, right? And Harker is obviously scrambling to save his wife Mina, and they do eventually. They track down Dracula's coffins and fill each of them with a sacred wafer so that he can't sleep, he can't rest in England anymore, and then they eventually follow him back to Romania, where they have a showdown with some of the servants. My man Quincy winds up like he's mortally wounded in the fighting, but still manages to crawl his way to the sleeping Dracula and stake him through the heart, while Harker runs up and cuts off his head because it's the head that matters, not the staking. You stake a vampire so that he's paralyzed, and then you cut off his head, and that's what kills him. That's well, at least that's the rule that I much prefer. I think a stake to the heart is too easy, personally. Um, but yeah, Dracula as a book is so good. I don't think I did it justice even in this review. I don't think that there's a movie that's done it justice either. There's a great story here, just a freaking great story, and I can't imagine what people were thinking when they first read it, right? Because you wouldn't know that Dracula was a vampire. You would be thinking that he was a demon or a werewolf or some sort of sorcerer. There wasn't a defined idea of what a vampire was just yet, but there was starting to be. And I think that's the interesting point, is that when you have this click where once it happens and you like, oh, it's a vampire. And I would love to have experienced that, right? Not knowing and then having that realization. Um, I personally was still impressed by all the different changes between what we know now, right? What we've done with Dracula and vampires in general, and what Stoker did, basically fathering the big vampire movement, right? Um, and I'd like to see an accurate movie at some point where Dracula is portrayed in his proper evil, malicious, murderous creature of the night role, as opposed to the romantic, sympathetic, that sort of cursed individual we encounter in nowadays. It would be awesome to see him as a villain again. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just Dracula. The book is amazing, and if there's lesson to be learned, I would argue that it's listen to your super genius wife and also to your weird Dutch friends, and don't go around smooching sexy vampires or not so sexy vampires. In the case of Drac himself, the short, squat, stubby fingered, grubby, evil old man. Um, yeah. So, bye.